Good afternoon. This is the council meeting for Monday, January 20th, 2020. That's a lot of 20s all in a row right there. We'll begin today with a territorial acknowledgement. We would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather today is the land traditionally used by the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Neutral peoples. We also acknowledge the enduring presence and deep traditional knowledge and philosophies of the Indigenous people with whom we share this land today. This is certainly a meeting including a lot of budget information, as all of these meetings so far in 2020 have and will be for the next while. And so we also pause for a moment of reflection at the beginning of this council meeting to think about the needs of our community, and may we show wisdom and compassion in all our decisions. Not that we're making many decisions today, but we are definitely thinking a lot about decisions and the impacts that they will have as we ask questions and go through our agenda. I look to council for disclosures of pecuniary interests and the general nature thereof. Councillor Vasek. Can we try the mic just to make sure it's into the...
Yeah. B28 WLU City Studio related to place of employment, if we talk about it.
Yeah, that's worth flagging, since I know CAO's group is up today. So if we do ask, if we are going to ask any questions about that particular item, it would be useful to say that before you ask it. So Councillor Vasek can do the appropriate thing. Any other disclosures of pecuniary interest in the general nature thereof? Seeing none. Approval of minutes. There are none today. And that moves us to delegations. Our first are public delegations. Tracy Van Gelsbeek, the Executive Director of the Uptown BIA. I see we have a budget. And I don't think we have Tracy. Well, if we can ask into the ether, are there any questions on the budget from the BIA that maybe council reps could answer if they had it? Okay, sure. Go ahead, Councillor Bonagor.
I did have a question for staff regarding one line in the budget, and that's to do with the graffiti contribution. We did this as a pilot for 1 year, and I had hoped when we approved that pilot to see a report on its efficacy before we kind of went forward with it. So I'm wondering if that report's coming forward, and whose budget is that coming from?
Mr. Anderson.
Through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor Bonagor, certainly very well aware of the pilot project, and it's a very good point with respect to the pilot year that we completed in 2019. I know it was a successful outcome, but I'd certainly work with the BIA and follow up with council, perhaps through a briefing note, just to kind of give you those analytics. And I know the intent of the BIA is to move forward in 2020 as well. Great.
Yeah, that briefing note would be great. Thank you.
Anything else jump out at folks worthy of asking into the ether or to the Anderson? Seeing none, is there a decision point on this, clerks? I thought we usually have to ratify a budget, but I don't see it on the agenda.
We've actually just emailed Tracy, so I believe that she was planning on presenting today, so I think she'll be up shortly. There's no decision at this point that I'm aware of.
Okay. Oh, well, if there has to be, I'm sure that's an issue we can correct in due course. Mr. Hedinga, Paul knows things about budgets and BIA levies.
Just for information to council, I'll be coming back to council with the actual BIA levy and the official approval of the levy when we bring forward the tax bylaw for that in a couple months' time.
This is part of the April-May cycle of...
Yeah.
Okay. That's useful. I know that we do it, but usually it's time connected to the presentation. All right. So, Julie, does that mean we're looking to hold, or we just move through?
I believe at this time we should move to the next agenda item, and then when Tracy arrives, we can come back to the BIA budget.
Yeah, that would be my preference as well. So that will move on to staff presentations on business plans for the 2020 to 2022 budget cycle and corporate cycles. So leading off, we'll begin with the Office of the Chief Administrative Officer. That's Tim.
I will let Kevin navigate the keyboard here. All right, I think we're all set. So thanks very much, Chair Henry, Mayor, and Council. It's a pleasure to present the 2020 to 22 CAO Department Business Plan. I'll follow a format similar to last week. I'm going to take us through a quick journey of the department and some of the key actions identified in the business plan. The documents are on pages 7 to 29 of the Consolidated Business Plan book. And then my colleagues and I will be available for questions and answers. So as reflected on page 7 of the CAO's official office, we have overall administrative responsibility for the organization. And in addition, we have some specific service delivery areas, and they're noted on the screen here, including economic development, legal services, and asset management. So I'm joined this afternoon by Justin McFadden, Director of Economic Development, Estero Kalageropoulos, Manager of Arts and Culture, Steve Ross, Director of Legal Services, gives his regrets, and we'll do our best to navigate through this, and Cassandra Pacey, our Manager of Asset Management. In addition, we have Brad and Philippa available on the finance front to assist. So I'll dive into the economic development key initiatives, and they're reflected on the screen here. The first up is the strategic land development, and as Council knows, we're heavy into the west side employment land construction phases. We're integrating, and in 2020, we'll be moving into the deep services, the roads and sewers, all in an effort to bring forward more light industrial lands and advanced technology opportunities on those lands on the west side. In addition, Uptown Waterloo will be a focus for expanding our office capacity and our cultural uses. A business retention and expansion program allows staff to better understand the threats and growth opportunities facing local employment sectors. And for 2020 to 22, our intent is to kind of redevelop our BR&E approach, and we'll focus our efforts on priority sectors that include the not-for-profits, arts and culture industries, and traditional business sectors. Our increased investment in the arts and culture sector is being enabled this budget cycle through the municipal accommodation tax, which Council will remember started July of 2019. And that is also going to help us in the deployment of some of the key festivals and events. In addition, we'll be leading the Canada Day charge commencing in 2020 and moving forward. The post-secondary institutions, of course, are major drivers of our economy in Waterloo and Waterloo region. And so this is an area of focus that will include exploration of leadership in artificial intelligence, continued town and gown collaborations, University Avenue Gateway study finalization, and further enhancement of the collective Waterloo story, because it's a great story to tell. Measuring our progress, I'm going to touch on a few areas here, some broader than just the CAO's office, and the ISO 37120 is a good example. So this is a project sponsored by the World Council on City Data and the federal government, and their goal was to attract 15 more Canadian cities to participate. And so Kitchener and Waterloo have joined Cambridge in the effort. The ISO 37120 effort cuts across all of our departments and divisions. There's 104 indicators, and we're about 70% done collecting the information for that first submission. And our goal is to finish that the first quarter of 2020 and report those results to Council. And if all goes well, we hope to be platinum certified ISO participants as we move forward. Economic development will continue to produce the annual culture plan and those report cards, which I think Council is fairly familiar with. And the uptown parking utilization studies are now underway. So this was post-ION construction. We've made a commitment for 5 years of annual parking utilization analysis throughout the uptown core. And I believe council would have seen just a quick briefing note late last week with our first set of measures from October of 2019. And the final one, the new economic development strategy, which was approved by this council in 2019, lays out a 5-year plan of action for the economic development division. And it consists of 3 strategic pillars: start and attract, grow and preserve, and organize and empower. And our plan with that report as well is to report annually on our progress. Shifting to legal services, key initiatives for legal services include a review of the city's site plan approvals process and a lens of improving timelines, streamlining the steps involved, and strengthening the site plan committee role. In addition, we're actively participating in a region-wide approach, a Lean Six Sigma approach with respect to official plan amendments and zone change process methodology. So that cuts across all the cities and the township and the region. And again, with a lens of improving our timelines and creating more consistency region-wide. Legal services will also work closely with the various divisions to assist in implementing the Truth and Reconciliation Report recommendations and facilitating affordable housing where those opportunities do present. In terms of measuring progress in legal services, this one's a little more difficult to quantify. It's kind of dependent on the legal matter. The depth and scope of some of these things can be very much different. However, as noted, there is significant real estate work and provincial offense court work occurring through this team. Also noted is the overriding approach of legal services, where the team really does try to do as much as they can in-house and then refer externally where we just workload-wise need some additional assistance or some real legal expertise that we don't have on staff. And shifting to asset management, Ontario Reg 58817, which was enacted by the province back in December 2017, it outlines significant requirements for the application of asset management principles in all municipalities across Ontario. And that requires us to make informed infrastructure decisions. So staff are working, we've completed phase 1, we're starting our work in incorporating the phase 2 requirements in 2020. And that includes measuring current levels of service and the cost to sustain those services for our core assets, our roads and water, hard infrastructure. The phase 3 requirement incorporates the same information, however, for non-core assets such as facilities, parks, and fire. And that'll be worked on throughout the balance of council's term and finish in 2023. Asset management will continue to develop the annual report cards about the current and projected status of the city's infrastructure assets. So again, asset management is a relatively new section within the city. And so there's not a lot of measures. Their focus right now is on populating the asset management system using the decision support system for the development of the future asset management plan steps that are required. But there are metrics that are being considered, and they include the percentage of asset classes with medium or higher level of asset maturity. And for 2018, I've got a note, 58% of our asset classes have rated medium or higher. And the number of decision support system information improvements made annually will also be a potential metric for quantity and quality elements. And that can be tracked on a go-forward basis. So just rounding out the presentation here, we've kind of reflected our community impact from a CAO's division department perspective. And we see the city's strategic plan as a real beacon for the city, for us, for council, for the community. It really provides a common focus for us all to galvanize around. The strategic plan is also about alignment, and we believe we have strongly aligned resources through this business planning process to achieve the target objectives. And on arts and culture, through the culture plan, we've made this area a priority. The goal is to make Waterloo a more vibrant and even better place to live, work, learn, and play. And of course, culture shapes who we are and how we view the world. Culture is entwined into all aspects of our daily life, I wanted to weave that one in there because I know IPPW mentioned they touch everyone every day. I think culture does as well. So we've got 2 for 2 here. And this is a real strategy for us in terms of economic development and talent attraction and retention in the community. On asset management, $2.3 billion in municipal assets are now being professionally managed through the asset management system. And of course, careful stewardship of these assets will benefit both current and future generations. Finally, our legal services team provides outstanding risk management services to all the departments and divisions. We are in the service delivery business, and there's hundreds and over 100 services being delivered by the city. And there's certainly a risk management perspective there that having in-house legal certainly helps deliver on. So that ends the formal presentation, Chair Henry, and I can turn it open to questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Henderson. Just as a housekeeping note, we'll take questions for Tim and Co, and then we'll go back to the Uptown Waterloo BIA budget presentation, and then down to the corporate service business plans. So questions for Tim and team. Councillor Hammer.
Thank you. Through you, Chair Henry, to our CAO. Tim, thank you for the work that you and your team have done in putting the proposals together, the business plan together. My question is probably at a higher level, and it's great that we've got measures that we're putting into each of our plans, and it's nice to be able to tell the story. However, the question for me is, where are the targets? And so really, how are we advancing it? So it may be more of a comment than a question at this stage. I'd like us to be able to consider where it's appropriate, where we've got enough data to give us a potential target, that we start looking at targets and measuring our success against those targets rather than just counting what we did. Just your thoughts on that.
Through you, Chair Henry. Councillor Henry, it is a really good point. The measures I've reflected here today, I think, are just a snapshot of some of the work that's going on across the corporation. There's a lot of mandatory measurement that goes on, and there are targets associated with that. I think of a lot of the municipal provincial report card reporting, our financial information returns that are required every year. And we've set some benchmarks, both ourselves and comparing ourselves to other municipalities on that front. And I think there's examples from across the departments. But we'll certainly take that one away in terms of the business plan presentations and just being more mindful about setting the targets and where we're going. Probably the trend line would help as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? I have Councillor Bonagor, then Councillor Freeman.
Through you, Chair Henry. Thank you for all the information. And I know that I've been asking a lot of questions leading up to this, so thank you as well to you and staff for answering many of those. I appreciate it. So just to speak, again, kind of to zoom out for a moment, we as a city have some really big pieces of city building coming online now. We've got the rec complex and a new library coming, which is great. We also have this big thorny infrastructure issue that we're trying to grapple with. So maybe from just a very broad lens, I'm curious, to me it strikes me as I'm trying to find places where we might be able to slow down in order to try and balance these competing issues. So, or I'm wondering, when you're looking at your business plan, when you're looking at all of the things we're trying to accomplish, do you see any places within your area where we may need to pause for breath, slow a project down, or anything like that in order to try and find the balance that we're seeking?
Through you, Chair Henry, Councillor Bonagor, it's a very good point. This term of council, there are some major capital deliverables occurring, and you've noted a couple there. I think our capital program in total is about $294 million over this 3-year term. And I think it's just under $500 million in total. So it's really front-ended. I can speak to the economic development area. There are some significant projects in there that have traditionally been in our 3-year horizon, but I call them more placeholder projects. They're there in the event opportunity does present itself. And a couple examples that come to mind for me are the East Side Land capital dollars. So we've got budgeted in there money to help service and bring those lands to fruition this council term. But we're actually operationalizing the west side lands. So we don't anticipate there's a burning need for the east side lands, and it's likely a project that will be deferred. I think the Uptown Parkade is another good example. Very significant infrastructure investment, but has again been held as a placeholder until opportunity arises, so to speak. So I think from the CAO's division area, there's a couple examples there. And there likely will be across the departments. In some cases, there are budgeted dollars, and for unknown circumstances, decisions do get made to defer the project. But yes, no, certainly appreciate that observation. There's a high amount of work coming out of community services with those infrastructure building projects, and IPPW for certain as well, which has a cascade effect on all the departments in delivering these things. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. I also just have a few more specific questions. One is regarding Canada Day. So I'm just wondering, when this came to us, it wasn't at least explicit in the report that this would be ongoing funding forevermore. It seemed to me that there'd be a chance to review the approach. I'm wondering if that was part of the intent, and will there be an opportunity kind of maybe a couple of years down the track to review the approach and make sure that it is consistent, or like look for opportunities to see if it's the right direction to be going in?
Through you, Chair Henry, maybe I'll call on Justin and or Estero to help take this one.
Through you, Chair Henry, our commitment that we made to Council in October was to bring a report back to Council after this year's Canada Day event to report on how it went and what sort of public response we had, and any changes that are going to be needed for next year, if we do it again next year. I think our sense was that we would try to do it for 3 years, so over this current budget period, so that we have a sense of what is actually needed, and then that would be reviewed again as part of the next budget cycle. Just so that Council is aware, we have looked into opportunities, or we are currently exploring opportunities for grant funding and private sector sponsorship to offset some of those expenses. But I think we need at least 3 years to get a sense of what the actual costs of that event will be.
Okay, then just I don't know if I need to flag this, but when it comes to budget day, I may request that we change this to a 3-year funding with, as opposed, it's listed in the budget book as indefinite, so just ongoing, so I may just bring that forward.
I think that's useful to flag now. There may be multiple ways of thinking about that problem.
Okay. All right, excellent. Thank you. And when I was looking through the varying budget books, it seems to, when it comes to the Waterloo Public Square, there seem to be some competing demands coming forward. We have some kind of smaller requests for like economic development needs, but then there's also larger sheets from IPPW in terms of bigger pieces like a water feature and a shade structure. I'm wondering, can we work out how, like, are any of these in conflict? Should we be looking at prioritizing the bigger pieces and then having the smaller ones come in once those are in place? This is probably to both yourself and to Mr. Rapp.
Yeah, maybe a dual response here, and probably Estero as well. But I'll start it off and maybe turn to both of them. Councillor Bonagor, you're correct. There are a number of individual capital budget items associated with the public square. Some of them are routine replacement within the CAO office, for instance, if you look at some of those smaller line budget items. But in addition, there's some significant capital future thinking on the public square, which includes, I believe, a shade structure in 2020 and water feature structure, or water feature amenity, which I believe is in 2021 or 2022. Maybe look to Mr. Rapp on that one. And in addition, we have some further out additions back in the CAO area. They are all being coordinated. I know this shade structure initiative and the water feature structure is an IPPW project, and I think John Griffin is project managing that. But our staff and the operations team that deal with the square on a daily basis are all working in harmony on it. I don't know, Mr. Rapp, if you want to add to that.
Certainly, through Chair Henry to Councillor Bonagor, everything that Tim said is correct. From the IPPW perspective, I was actually just meeting with the developer who donated or plans to donate the $500,000 for the water feature. He committed to that again this morning. The design component is in the capital budget for this year under John Griffin, yes, and the construction next year. And the shade structures, again, will be under John Griffin as well. More so under the Uptown Public Realm strategy, the study. But we'll be doing both of those works over the next 2 years, and completion really of the public square from a capital investment perspective, if you will.
Okay, so I wanted confirmation that, and it sounds like all of these teams are working closely together to make sure that everything's lined up in the appropriate order. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay.
Actually, if I can, Chair Henry, that's probably a good example of another project that had the ion construction not been occurring in Uptown Waterloo, it would have been a project we may have activated earlier, but we did want to see the completion of that work before we started to do additional construction work in that proximity.
And this is, sorry, one more question if I may. When it comes to the Carnegie Library, we did approve the release of funds last year, and there's a request line for additional funds this year to top that up. I'm just curious what that new funding is for and what impact it may have if we requested you stick to that original budget.
All right, I'll start this one, and I see Justin's going to stand up and also respond. So yes, it's through you, Chair Henry. There are additional funds. I think $600,000 is being requested this budget cycle, and that's in addition to the $3 million that was approved in late 2019. And those additional dollars, I think, just come as a result of better information on our detailed design. We started that budget process with what I call a Class D budget estimate. And throughout 2018 and 2019, our architect working on the design vision for the facility has been able to really crystallize what those budget numbers should look like. There was also a complication with the elevator requirements on that project, which are a little bit more budget pressure than we originally anticipated. But yeah, I think those two go together, and what that would realize at the end of it is a building that's ready for occupancy. It wouldn't fit it out inside. That would be a future tenant's responsibility. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I see no further information there, and I'll just add my recollection to Mr. Anderson's prior answer on the timing of the public square water feature. That was also an example in the last 3-year budget cycle where connecting the capital approval with the operating impact highlighted to council near the end of the budget day that it was probably at the top of where it wanted to approve a tax rate increase, and the $12,000 annual operating requirement, or whatever the number was also a bridge too far for some. So I think it was a balance of LOT construction and trying to avoid the operating impact in that budget cycle. So that's an example of those documents sort of working in concert and sort of seeing those connections. And I think the other thing I'd recommend to council, I think we've had questions already on the speed and size of particularly the capital program that's going. But the best way to track the impact of capital on operating is, if we're concerned about operating, is to look at the operating impacts. Many of these are zero to negligible operating impacts, but there are some big items, maybe not the biggest capital projects, but some of those have large operating impacts. And if council is concerned about the operating pressure from those capital programs, that's why those lines are there, to give us line of sight on those and to make decisions around timing if we wish. So with that, I can go to Councillor Freeman.
Thank you. Through you, Chair Henry. So following on to a couple of the questions. So with regard to the uptown parking expansion, and I appreciate the response that you made. I'm trying to understand, is that $5 million on a tax-based pressure, or is it just a straight enterprise pressure?
Through you, Chair Henry, if I can refer that one to Brad, I think it's primarily development charges, but let's just look at it here if we can.
Yeah, through Chair Henry to Councillor Freeman, that's correct. It is 90% development charge funded, 10% enterprise funded in this case from parking, so no tax-based implications. As Tim noted, that's a bit of a placeholder project as we're not 100% sure on the need versus some surface lot expansion versus structured expansion, but it gives us the flexibility for both. And that line item will be reviewed in the coming years as we know more about the changes to Bill 108 as parking is a soft service. So that's currently the maximum permitted amount under the old regime, if you will. So there'll be more work to do on that in future years.
Right. For me, it highlights a little bit of the challenge, right, as we navigate through the budget documents, because the broader citizenry, I don't think they understand necessarily that when they look at some of these dollars, whether or not it's funded from taxes, like even when you look at the document, it identifies that it's non-routine, that there's yes to an operating impact, the project type is growth, and so on, and it doesn't really help the broader public understand that that is not driving an increase in their taxes. So then when we talk about things like, that's potentially a project we would defer, I think a lot of folks would suggest, well, then defer it now. Don't charge me for it. Do you know what I mean? But really, it's not a tax-based piece. So I think it's just a suggestion. Like, I don't know whether to change the budget documents, but to better outline those pieces. I had questions with regard to the, is it I-6? Is that the document with regard to the infrastructure piece? And I just wanted to make sure, that's under you right now, is it, Tim?
Through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor Freeman, I believe I-6 is. I'm just going to try to turn to the page.
I only brought my operating book today, and I know that or my capital book, and I marked it all up. What?
Through you, Chair Henry, I'll turn it to Brad. I think that is a corporate transaction one. So.
Yes. So,
yeah. It's currently under Ms. Patel?
No, so through Chair Henry to Councillor Freeman, I-6, the budget request for increased infrastructure funding, which is a mixture of tax base and hydro dividend revenue, is referred to as a corporate transaction. So it isn't in any of the departmental business plans. And the process for those dollars and how they're allocated then to the 4 placeholder projects was outlined in the long-term financial plan report. So if you can refer to that report, I believe pages 10 to 13 outline that process and what will come, but those projects are flagged as non-routine in nature, so they will come back to council subject to approval in February.
Okay, so I did leave the discussion paper at home. I marked it all up, but I arrived by bike, so I made some choices about how much weight I was carrying. But with regard to that item, and I'm just going to start the discussion now, if it makes sense. I guess what I didn't understand was it didn't appear as though the movement of the hydro dividend continued year to year, and that had been my original suggestion. So can someone help me to understand whether that does happen and it's not listed there because it's rolled in, or how?
Through Chair Henry to Councillor Freeman, you're correct. So it's not one time, it's ongoing.
That's what I thought.
So it is built in every year, but it's built into the base, and then that's why you don't see it in year 2 and year 3. Mm-hmm. So at this point in time, we feel that the $300 and some odd thousand off the top of my head with regard to the dividend is sustainable for the foreseeable future, but we're not in a position within this 3-year budget to consider more than that, but it is every year forever.
So, I mean, I'm happy that you looked at that, and I appreciate it. And I guess what I was wondering is there a possible ability to basically account for an inflation in that dividend year to year? That's all. So it wouldn't be, it would be a lesser amount, whether it's, whatever we're working on with CPX at 2%, whether we could consider like 2% more so that we're starting to inflate that piece going forward. So that was a question to take away and think about. And then I guess the only other thing I was going to say, and maybe it's a question for all of us, is that if there's projects that you really believe as staff, you're going to be pushed to be able to complete over the next 3 years. So in a way, it's kind of going back to Councillor Bonagor's question around this balance piece. It's for me, I struggle each year knowing that we ask for an increase in water services fees, but that we physically don't have the capacity to deliver on all the capital projects that we hope to do within that requested increase. And I realize that, that results in improvement to our reserve funds, and when we have opportunities to make decisions about perhaps doing a bigger section of repair, we have those reserves to lean into, and so on. But, when we're looking at 1.5 and this escalating number above CPI, there are some people for which that pressure on a recessive tax base is a little bit too much for them. And so I guess I'm basically saying, I don't know within your capital lines which projects you honestly don't think you can achieve over the 3 years. But if there are a few, I'd really like to see those dollars reallocated to help bring that number down. And I'm going to need help on budget day to identify those. And because I think capacity is a really important question. And I do feel in many respects that you've tried to address that, in the sense that you speak to the fact in that paper that talks about that piece. You talk about it being kind of the middle of the road option for starting to close the gap on our infrastructure spending. I really appreciate the fact that we haven't done this as a separate levy. I think it's the right thing to do, because I think it's very easy to get caught up in saying this is our tax increase and the levy is going to be this, more. So I really like the way that it's been done. But I guess I'm just, asking again, as I said, because I think we do have to make some tough choices. And the thing is we've upped operating, and I recognize that. We're bringing the Eastside Library on board, and that requires an investment in operating. We are going to be bringing on a new adult recreation center that's not the same size, capacity, or delivery model that we've had before, which requires more operating. And so I totally understand those elements. I'm just asking, is there other places to look?
There were a few things in there. The first one I had was Ms. Patel, I think, back on the hydro dividend, and I think Mr. Anderson, Mr. Rapp, Mr. Dexter, there's a lot of things to unpack there. So I'll start with Ms. Patel.
Through you, Councillor Henry, to Councillor Freeman, I could try to answer one of the questions that you asked with respect to adjusting the hydro dividend for inflation. Based on the shareholder agreement that we have, we are entitled to 50% of their of the dividend that they declare from the electric company to the holding company. That's the share of the dividend that we're entitled to. So it depends on the profits that they're generating, and that's a function of the Ontario Energy Board rates and when they go for their rate approval. So it's an extremely complex and nuanced process. So we would probably not have the ability to get more dividend and have it adjusted for inflation, because it is purely a function of how much revenue and how much dividend they're declaring and profit that they're making. So I wanted to make sure that we've certainly considered that. That's an excellent suggestion. We've considered it, but unlikely that it's going to come to fruition.
And then the other piece is on capacity and capital programs and whether we overfund beyond what we can do.
So maybe I'll start that one, Chair Henry. I know the budget team this year was really mindful, being aware of the significant amount of capital coming through this term of council and our ability to deliver. And I think we've really reflected on the capital program in a way that we're activating things that are kind of necessary in many cases. They're connected to other infrastructure pieces or commitments that we've got out there. But we can certainly look at it again between now and capital budget day. I think the opportunity for council as well is the nomenclature on what's routine and what's non-routine, which if it's non-routine, it'll come back to council for a decision whether to proceed or not. So that's an opportunity for council for sure. I don't know if Mr. Dykstra or Mr. Rapp want to layer in on the capital front.
Certainly through Chair Henry to Councillor Freeman. A significant number of the projects that you'll see in the capital budget within IPPW are tied to the development industry, where it is almost placeholder money. It's mostly development charge money as far as the city share, but it might look like there's an awful lot on the books moving forward, but we're really going to be in a holding pattern for some of those projects until the planning approvals or environmental assessments or just even the desire of the developer aligns with when the monies are there. So we always try to make sure the monies are there for them. With respect to our own projects, I don't think it's too much that we're trying to bite off of our own. And related to the additional funds, I know that we're trying to secure through additional monies. I'll just leave it at that. In the first year, we would start looking at our shave and pave or mill and pave program, which is very easy to administer. It really relies on the private sector to do the work. It's easy for us to watch over. And then we'd start coming back to council from the over target list of design time period and construction time period. But the first year, we'd be out there milling and paving roads there on the over target list.
Through Councillor Henry to all of council, just on this topic, lines 226 and 282 speak to the work of environment, parks, and as well facility design and management. And those really are the projects that we'll return on. And came out of the over target items. That's where we start to get into with this I-6 funding. We get into what has been deferred maintenance not being done until maybe it becomes a priority where we need on a roof. We are prioritizing the various roofs within the city. Can we do more? Definitely this helps with this on the mechanical side, electrical side. This all enables us to respond proactive, deal with what we own and make sure we are caring for it. So yes, and the teams are very busy on the new pieces that we're doing, where some of the items, whether it's menu items and op impacts for staffing, all help to solidify the teams that are needed now to deliver on what's before council in terms of the capital budget and build items that we want to advance.
Thank you, Chair Henry. Also, just to provide a little bit of perspective, I think further to Councillor Freeman's question about tax base versus enterprise or DC funded. On page 15 and 16 of the capital book, we just have a summary, and of the $294 million for the first 3 years of capital, $66 million is tax base funded. Some of that will also be the co-pay for the DC projects as well. So 66 million of the 294 is actually tax base funded, just to help with the context.
And it's fair to say as well, I think that the one of the shifts in the documents from last year to this year based on feedback from council, because councillors last year, some had queries around one project that you saw listed on 15 lines because it was funded from 15 different sources. And that was a lot of clutter for the decision making. And so this is a lean and mean piece. And so part of the reason we're not seeing the breakdown you can point to is because, in fact, council was looking not to see the breakdown for that. And we received a supplementary spreadsheet so you can filter to your heart's content to be able to see those items. Yeah, and I've enjoyed doing that when I've queried what is X funding, and I can just very quickly see it, and that's very helpful. But that doesn't bog down a book because paper is difficult to read. And the other piece on questions of, do staff have capacity to deliver additional projects? And also, does industry have capacity to deliver additional projects? Those were asked in the last budget cycle. And the report we received from the asset management team back in November at FSP provided replies to those. And the one that I recall that said, Mr. Rapp's answer on shave and pave was exactly what we got from transportation as the easiest and fastest way to deal with it. And from environment and parks inside Commissioner Dykstra's area, that was Parks is most challenged to deliver many more projects and would need to contract some more services perhaps to deal with a substantial piece. And we'll see them next week and can probe that a bit further. Sure, and then I've got Councillor Vasek.
Thank you. It was really kind of building on Councillor Hanmer's question.
I've got you first.
And with regard to the changes that you're looking for legal services to do a review of, so things like site plan and OP amendments and so on, it'd be really helpful, prior to starting that work, if we could even get a presentation that outlined kind of the goal of that work and where they're, like, what the target is in terms of, is the primary target to reduce the time from application to approval, or is the goal to improve, for example, the legal protections for the city, shall we say, within an approval system? I don't know, but it would be really helpful to get a sense of that before that work is undertaken in some respect, because if we're really not moving the bar very far, it would be helpful to decide how much time gets allocated to things like that. But anyways, that was the only other thing I had on the legal services one. I more broadly, I've been really happy that we have in-house legal. I think that the team has been really useful in terms of slowing down and in many cases preventing harassment of staff, on citizen matters. I think that they've been really instrumental in a lot of our bylaw complaint issues. And I think that the dog designation committee meetings are a lot more functional because of the fact that we have in-house legal counsel to make reference to.
Oh, thanks for that. Through you, Chair Henry. We'll certainly take away those notations on the Lean Six Sigma process of the two planning areas. I should note that that's collaborative work with IPPW, of course. That's sort of in their wheelhouse, but with some expertise and support from the legal area. And the regional effort, I know that one is actually a little more advanced. We should be able to provide council an update fairly quickly on that front. And we echo your thoughts on in-house legal. It's been very beneficial from a staff perspective, having an easy access to that type of advice.
So if I'm seeing nothing further there, I actually have Councillor Bodley, then Councillor Vasek, now that I actually looked down at my paper.
Thank you. Through you, Chair Henry. I had another question, but I'm going to piggyback since Councillor Freeman brought up I-6. I think as I've been contemplating the infrastructure levy or the portion of the property tax increase that's going towards infrastructure, one of the things that really sort of stuck out to me is that it's very I think it's very important that we align the infrastructure work that we are necessarily going to have to do as identified through our asset management planning with some of the climate change work that we're going to need to do as well too. And I think that really this infrastructure, a lot of the infrastructure funding, especially when we look at things like the WMRC and the green roof and some of the improvements to HVAC and things like that we're talking about to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, I think these are intrinsically linked. I know I've had conversations with Ms. Patel about how I would feel a lot better about I-6 if there was some commitment beyond the infrastructure portion that we were also going to have some sort of a green levy as a portion of the infrastructure piece. I know there are challenges as we move forward here in our first sort of crack at this, but it would be my personal opinion that we at minimum should be tracking what portion of this of CURF is going towards green projects, so that at minimum perhaps a future council would be able to look and say, going forward, this is a percentage of, this is how we would need to set up a theoretical GIRF, I guess, a Green Infrastructure Reinvestment Reserve Fund. So I don't know if you have any comments on that, or if any of the commissioners have any further comments on that. But if we were working towards that, it would make me feel a lot better about the infrastructure piece.
Through you, Chair Henry, maybe I'll just offer a couple of comments. I think alignment of some of Council's policies that you have or are developing does get reflected through the capital program. So I'm thinking of the Transportation Master Plan and some of the drivers on that front. Certainly, I think are in direct relationship to what you're talking about. Our green building policy, our energy efficiency efforts on our buildings. So I think there is a path there. The infrastructure investment, of course, does provide more enablement and really responds to the need of the overall $2.3 billion in assets and where we are currently in terms of the funding program. But no, we'll take that away. The notion of separating out or being able to quantify our green investment, I think, is something we can build on as we go forward too.
I have Ms. Patel as well.
Through you, Chair Henry, one of the townships is looking at setting up a separate levy for green infrastructure. So it does make sense, but in the conversations we've had with Councillor Bodley is that we're just starting out in looking at infrastructure investments, so it would be premature to isolate anything at this point. But we do agree with the suggestion that we could be tracking it for sure, so that we can see where the investment dollars are going. So certainly we support that suggestion.
Yeah, I think the challenge in the townships is they can have a 0.5% green levy and it nets them $25,000 a year, I think was the number I saw in the paper. Mr. Rapp?
Certainly, and if I can just add that a lot of the capital program and even the proposed operating budget within the stormwater section is related to climate change and trying to start advancing our some of the improvements we can make and systems we can make under current conditions, let alone where we might go in the next few years.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the comments there. And again, from my perspective, I think the idea of our ability in future to be able to set more aggressive targets as a council with respect to green infrastructure funding is going to be entirely dependent upon our ability to collect that data and to know where we are today in order to set a target for future spending. So I appreciate the comments, though. Thank you. My next question is for Tim, and it revolves around the Director of Strategic Initiatives position, and it also ties back to the climate emergency declaration and trying to understand how that position is going to work to I guess, give some authority and weight to some of the decisions that we're going to have to make around carbon budgeting, if that's the direction that we choose to go to. And sort of, I'd like you maybe to speak to how that position is going to work with the other departments, whether it's the energy manager being proposed in the community services division, or through the green building policy and IPBW. How is that position really going to have the authority to enact change and to work with the various departments on these types of initiatives?
Through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor Bodley, good question as well. I'm going to harken back to 2013 when we originally anticipated or had a vision for this position, and actually through budget processes couldn't hold on to it for a period of time, and so we lost it. But the vision of the Director of Innovation and Strategic Initiatives is to have that senior level person within the CAO's office to kind of give that corporate oversight of all the elements that you're noted. There's work going on in all the departments on the sustainability agenda. We envision, if council is supportive and actionable with respect to the climate action plan that is due in terms of work plan to council in 2020, that there'll be a lot of heavy lifting and coordination across all the departments. And so we really do see that position as the lead. It won't be able to do it all, so the resourcing requirements within the departments, you referenced the energy position within community services. We think that's a technical need within the department, and it's not that we can take one and create take the two positions and create one. we see the oversight again from the CAO's office, which we think will give it the drive and the direction necessary from a corporate perspective. I envision that as we have historically, will be a lot of collaboration across the departments, and the sustainability agenda committee notion will be strongly reactivated within the corporation as we go forward.
Thank you. And through you, Chair Henry, just I guess for confirmation then, the intention is that this is going to be a senior level position in the CAO's office that will have the authority to designate down to other and working with other departments to achieve goals, not just on the sustainability piece, but if we go back to our strategic plan, some of the other big things, whether it's around equity and inclusion, sense of belonging, whether it's around affordable housing. And I know there's been a lot of discussion around Lean Six Sigma. It's the intention that this position is a senior level position that's going to be able to sort of enact change corporately wide. Is that fair to say?
Through you, Chair Henry, that is absolutely correct, yeah. And you've referenced a couple of the examples there. Lean Six Sigma, we've got some capital dollars recognized in our program moving forward, but again, from a cultural perspective and overall oversight and drive across the corporation, we see this as a key position as we go forward. So yes, definitely a senior level position.
And then I have Councillor Vasek, and then I've got a list.
Thanks. Through you, Chair Henry. I have a couple of questions. One that has emerged since we chatted, and it's related to the Director of Strategic Initiatives and working together. And so the other cities in the region, do they have a similar position?
I am, through you, Chair Henry, I'm mindful. I believe the region has a similar structure with respect to a senior level person or a division that drives in that direction. It's a little different in comparison to our operation here. I'm thinking of Cambridge. I believe they do as well. They have activated a strategic initiatives director role. It may not have the sustainability lens, but it has special projects that are occurring within it. And I know in past conversations, Kitchener was looking to activate a similar type of role as they go forward.
Okay, thanks. So this question comes from someone who feels, overgoverned, supportive of amalgamation. Would the person in this position, would they, given the history of working on joint initiatives to work collaboratively with the other municipalities, is that something that's the person who, if it were approved and if someone were hired into it, that they would be working with the other regional and municipalities and township in the region?
Through you, Chair Henry, most definitely. Yes, I would definitely see that. I think many of the councils around us have passed similar climate emergency motions to us, so the notion of carbon budgeting is a good example that we've talked about at the CAO level, that there's an opportunity for coordination in how we consider it and how we deploy it within the respective municipalities. So that's just one example. Yeah.
Great, thanks. And then my other question is related to physician recruitment, which is a tiny budget item, but it's such a big community issue since many people still don't have family doctors, and it's a business retention, and it's a business retention, I think, matter too, probably, and talent retention, I guess is what I mean. So given that you're asking for this to be ongoing and it's currently kind of a one-time recurrent thing, I'm just wondering how we can get kind of better updated or in an ongoing way updated. So a couple of things I'm curious about is we heard from Ian McLean from the chamber, from the family physician side, but I'm curious if we could hear also from the specialist side in this term of council from an update about how things are going, where are the gaps, what are the successes. Then I'd also be curious if this were approved in an ongoing way or still one time, if kind of at the beginning of every council term, the council could get an update from both the chamber and the specialist from the hospital as well, so they're aware of the program, so it just doesn't end up becoming hidden and the money keeps going without really the future councils having a sense of what's working and what's not. Are those things possible?
Through you, Chair Henry, I believe on both fronts, yes. As you noted, Ian McLean has been in here, I think, probably a few times in the last 5 years to update on the physician recruitment program. But it has been some time, I think, since the hospital specialists have been in and talked to council. So we can certainly take that one away and activate that. Similarly, at the beginning of each council term, I think they would be very open to such an opportunity. Yeah.
And there may be some benefit, Tim, to thinking about the all council meetings, since there are a number of municipalities that be engaged on this, because it's a component of a broader healthcare piece, and rather than isolating it, there may be mutual interest in all of that and save people from going around, or we might want to grill them individually, and that's something that we can. I know Councillor Veith always enjoys doing. There's two sort of thoughts to think of there. Looking to Mayor Jaworski or Councillor Veith, anything for Tim? Okay. So from my vantage point, Mr. Anderson, one of my questions was mostly asked by Councillor Bodley, so I will leave you alone. And the other ones I've got are for Justin on some of these, just to sort of signal him. I think at a high level, I think there's a lot of detail coming through here. But one of the things I was trying to do when I was looking through the documents was take our strategic plan, the actions that were listed there, and see what linkages I could find across the document. And the one piece I didn't see a clear link and an objective was inside the economic development area, and that was specifically around how we would use community economic development to address economic disparity. And I was wondering where I would be looking inside the business plans or the broader budget documents to see how we were trying to move that yardstick forward over the next 3 years.
Through you, or to you, Chair Henry. So that initiative was, I think, one that sort of percolated towards the end of the process with the economic development strategy. So I'd say it was kind of something new that wasn't really contemplated during the corporate strategic plan. And therefore it was something that is probably naturally not in both documents. I'm not sure what the next part of it was. Was that the full answer to your question, or?
I think it was recognizing that we have a strategic priority with the specific action listed in our strategic plan. I'm curious as to how that'll be advanced through this council term, and it could be looking at it more and developing some things, and we'd see that at a certain point if that's the state of it. But I am curious to see how all of the pieces of the strategic plan are seeing some movement through this council term, and maybe this is even higher than just economic development. Maybe you can look over your right shoulder and see if there's something outside of ECDEV to think through on this file.
Through you, Chair Henry. I think, as Justin noted, the economic development strategy that was just approved by council, that's one opportunity. I think there's probably opportunity across the departments. It's probably an area for us to reflect deeper on and provide council with a little bit more information. So if we can take that one away.
Yeah. No, I think that'll be useful for us to see coming back. And I know I've got some questions when we get to corporate services. There may be some linkages under there to be able to advance some. But so then getting more into a level of detail on the MAT funding pieces. When I was looking at B27, which was the allocation for all of the MAT funding, I saw $70,000 increase to sort of foundational arts and culture spending. I wasn't sure what that meant, and I was hoping for some detail on what that meant.
Through you, Chair Henry, we're going to look at each other here for a second while we get the sheet open. But Brad, I think will kick us off here. So B27 is the municipal accommodation tax. Yes.
So through Chair Henry to Chair Henry, and Estelle can build on this if I missed the mark, but the intention there is to increase the funding that goes to the arts and culture affiliates, bringing them more in alignment with some of the other affiliate groups in the neighborhood and sports realm. In comparison to those groups, they're underfunded. And there was a direct linkage made in terms of the MAT revenue and how investing in arts and culture results in increase in overnight stays. So when we initially proposed the MAT, there was a commitment made by not just this council, but all councils that those proceeds would be reinvested in items that increased or supported the tourism sector versus just bringing it into the general tax base, if you will. So that's where we've tried to set that spending plan up in terms of items that support it, but also giving some flexibility to respond to other things that may arise. For example, last year, the Special Olympics support that came to this council, that's also being funded from MAP proceeds. But the 70,000 is specifically to true up the arts and culture affiliates.
Through you, Chair Henry, just to add to that, I think community capacity has been identified as a real challenge for the community. So this is one attempt to build that community capacity so that we can increase that cultural tourism aspect of what we do and what the community does.
Okay, and I think it'll probably be helpful for us to get a sense of how that percolates. I mean, I'm not looking on budget day for this means there'll be 10,000 more here, 15,000 more there, but I think we'll look over a council term for how the new investment and where it's going and how it's having an impact. I think will be helpful for us to tell the story, and I'm sure to help the culture community and the hotel community understand where the dollars flowing through them are going. And the other thing, while I've got you up here, I saw as well sort of the addition of an additional festival and events, FTE that comes in, contract and then boost. What should the community expect to see from that additional FTE that we're putting in there from these dollars?
Through you, Chair Henry, so the intent of that position is to increase our capacity to both deliver expanded programs and events, so things like an expanded Open Streets program, expanded Lumen, and also to better support the community events that happen so that we can grow, again, that cultural tourism sector.
Okay. All very helpful. I wanted to connect the dots between the dollars and where they're going beyond the high level pieces in there. I think that's all I wanted to touch on here. Is there anything else for council, for Mr. Anderson and team? If not, thank you. And I know we'll be chatting even more as we go through. So we'll cycle back up to 5A to see the presentation from the Uptown Waterloo BIA on their 2020 budget. Tracy, when you're ready.
Well, my deepest apologies. There was a misunderstanding about the timing, and so sorry about that, Chair Henry and the rest of council, and thank you for bearing with us. And I thought it was 3 o'clock, and so I'm right on time.
Now it is.
So what was shared with you was our budget for 2020, and I thought I would provide some highlights throughout it and then open it up for questions after that. So when we look at our revenues, this is the first time since construction that we increased our levy by 2%. That was historically what we used to do, and then with construction coming along, our board had decided to curb that. So now with 2020 being a year with no construction, with the exception of Caroline Street, we decided to increase that 2% for inflation. And also with that increase, there was some property values that had increased in that time frame as well. So you see that increase there. A couple other things in revenue that I wanted to note. Our rent is going up this year, so hence the rent reimbursement, which we just started to track last year in our revenues. So that increased a little bit, and then also we never tracked the contribution of the City of Waterloo's involvement with the Goodbye Graffiti program as well. I think other than that, the rest of that's self-explanatory. When we look at our payroll this year, we had a contract person for the last year and a half, and this year we were able to make that a full-time position. So there's added benefits, and then we also provided a 2% increase for inflation as well there too. When we look at administration, we did have an increased cost of bookkeeping. We've hired a really great firm, and they're doing a fantastic job, but there is an increase in cost to that. I mentioned about our rent, and then also with professional development, just making sure that we have enough staff and board members that are able to do that as well. I think a few other things I would want to mention, that our social media advertising, we actually did lower that a little bit this year, just because we're finding that we were able to cover some of that through some of the events that we do. You'll notice in our co-op advertising that increased, but that's because we actually took some out of our Christmas co-op advertising. So we had removed that. Halloween, we added some new things that we did our Treats in the Streets this year, and we want to do a haunted walk too as well. So there's some costs that are increased there. I mentioned about co-op for Christmas. When we look at BIA programs, there's a slight increase there. It's just more about because we did our rebrand, which definitely comes on the next in the next couple lines with our marketing and recovering and support programs. With that new rebrand, we have to do some new pull-ups and signage and decals and things like that. So that those budget lines will increase there as well. And then we were looking to do some more direct mail this year with regards to those maps that we provide in the N2J and N2G, I think it is, postal codes. And I think too, another key piece that did increase our marketing was in the past, we've had a very small budget to donate uptown dollars. And this year we really wanted to amp that up a bit because it's a great way to keep money being spent here in Uptown. So we did increase that budget as well. And then when you look at everything else, it's pretty much on par from the past years. But we did have an increased budget for those various different reasons.
Thank you very much, Tracy. Questions now that we've had the additional detail? Seeing none, thank you very much to you and the team for all that you've done. I know it's been an ambitious year, and there would be not without some of its challenges, but the rebrand I think is exciting. It's new, it's fresh, and that I think we can really drive everybody because everybody is uptown. I think that's a really exciting, a really exciting thing. We're all, for example, uptown right now. I know it just blows your mind. It's a fantastic place, and keep doing all that work that you need to do. And I know that. As various other projects continue to evolve, mostly region-led, but as we start to deal with the uptown, streetscaping, priority projects, there'll be a lot of excitement and coordination that we can have, making sure they work for everybody. So thank you very much for sticking around and walking us through the changes.
Thanks very much, Chair Henry. Thanks for not asking a whole bunch of questions like you did of the CAO.
We pay him, we don't pay you, so that makes all the difference. Back to people we pay directly. We have Commissioner Patel coming up to the podium. I see, by the way, finance staff has just totally disappeared from you as you came up to the podium.
Because it's now a corporate services presentation, so they're also wearing the second hat. So thank you and good afternoon, Chair Henry, Mayor Jaworski, and members of council. It is my pleasure to present the business plan for Corporate Services Department. It is on pages 83 to 128 of the business plan book. Corporate services is the core of City's governance and administrative processes. Through our services, we provide functional expertise and process management in the areas of communication, led by our Director, Tony Iveroni, procurement and fleet maintenance through Tracy Bell, human resources through Kathy Vitas, information technology through Max Min, legislative services through Olga Smith, and finance through Philippa Reynolds and Paul Hedinga. We are primarily internal service providers and support our business partners in the frontline divisions in their delivering services to the residents and members of the community. We are at the heart of most business processes. Taking a look at the recent snow clearing operation this past weekend as an example, while crews from Transportation and Parks Division were on the front line of the snow clearing operation, fleet staff ensured that the city's snow clearing vehicles were in sound working condition and available for use. That there were fleet staff on call for any urgent need over the weekend. The procurement team managed the contract and the purchase of the road salt. The stockroom ensured that we had enough road salt in our salt shed for ongoing snow clearing operations. And more broadly, that we maintain our commercial vehicle operators registration or CVOR, and that we monitor all incidents and accidents impacting the CVOR rating, that we loop in the city's health and safety committee for any such matters, and that we're responding to any issue from the public. And more generally, that the staff are paid through the payroll process, vendors paid through the accounting process, that we're collecting taxes and utility revenues on time. Council meetings such as today are scheduled and run so that Council can approve funds for ongoing operations, that management reports are available to all divisions so that they can ensure that they stay within budget for operating and capital items, our IT systems and networks are up and running, that we have effective public engagement, and that our staff have support from our human resources team and have a safe and healthy work environment. We deliver on our statutory responsibilities under the Municipal Act, and we ensure that the decision-making process is open and transparent. We are the backbone of the city's administrative and governance processes. So looking at communication as our first division, the key initiatives on the list here are the public engagement with a greater focus on using different tools, whether digital or in person, to engage members of the community that might not typically have been involved, as well as supporting divisions in the public engagement exercise that they may need to undertake and providing training to appropriate city staff on the standards and methodology for public engagement. We're looking to continue to certify more employees under IAP2 to ensure we are following the best practice that has been endorsed by Council. And later in the Council term, we will be looking at a website refresh to enhance user experience on our website, working with all the departments to look at options for additional public-facing applications. Large public gatherings is an ongoing issue, and the communications team is an integral part of the effort to look at different strategies. As you can see, these are the metrics that we have with respect to measuring our progress. The Waterloo.ca webpage has had 2.2 million views. Our corporate social media network impressions have grown by 7% to 5.6 million impressions, and the number of engaged Waterloo topics is 18. Looking at finance, it is essentially comprised of two teams, and without getting too technical, one team is under Ms. Philippa Reynolds and is primarily responsible for financial planning, analysis, budgets, grant applications, and investments. The second team under Mr. Hedinger is responsible for billing and collection of property tax and water bills, payroll function, general accounting, management reporting, and statutory financial reporting. With regards to initiatives, you're currently encountering a key initiative from finance right now, which is the 3-year budget process. It is about 16 to 18 months of work at the staff level before the budget is tabled at Council, and there is a significant amount of work thereafter also to update the financial decisions of Council. And as you already know, there are several legislative changes coming through on the development charges for soft services being eliminated, and a new community benefits charge methodology that will replace it. City staff will need to work through any regulations that have yet to come through and to develop a CBC bylaw and provide analysis to Council on the financial impacts of the new regime. We are also looking at a new portal for our tax and water billing where users can access their account information online. We'll be working with Water Services team and with the AMI project team to ensure integration and a good user experience. Work will also continue on the payroll time automation project and the usual PeopleSoft upgrades for finance and HR modules. Our metrics, as shown in the business plan, we received $1.6 million in grants in 2018. We're pretty proud of the fact that 93% of our payments and receipts are processed electronically. Our taxes outstanding and receivable is at 5% of the total tax billing. And we have a financial dashboard that we update annually with information to guide Council and our residents on the financial health of the city. The fleet and procurement, this team has two distinct and primary functions, the procurement function and the fleet maintenance function. Amongst the initiatives, procurement has a significant role to play in procurement associated with capital infrastructure projects. The team is involved in procurement planning, understanding business requirements and project risks, developing risk mitigation strategies with our business partners, and all the time ensuring that the process is timely, open, and transparent, and that the most competitive price is obtained for the city. And related to that, procurement team is looking at new initiatives for a supplier performance management program that would provide a standardized approach to evaluating vendor performance and integrating it into future procurement processes. A key point, about 70% of our capital spend is on external contractors, and hence this is a rather important initiative for us. Social procurement is another initiative and one that would align with Council's strategic plan and provide a mechanism to integrate those strategic pillars into a procurement process. Both of these initiatives are contingent on additional resources being added to the procurement team and for which there is a budget request before Council. The KPIs that we have, going to the fleet team. Fleet has been part of the pilot Lean Six Sigma project, and this initiative will continue to build on the work of capturing key quantitative information leading us towards data-based decision-making. Aligning with Council's strategic priorities is research and assessment of initiatives to move towards a greener fleet. The KPIs here, procurement has seen the volume of procurements increase on average about 9% year over year for the last 5 years. For 2019, we've had more recent stats. We've had 129 procurements totaling $37.7 million that the procurement team was involved and overseeing. Not only is the volume of procurement going up, the complexity of the capital projects is increasing, and therefore the complexity of the procurements is increasing, and there are a number of changes in trade agreements which is also adding to the complexity of the work. Procurement has been dealing with the increasing volume through various efficiencies, but since 2018, we have had to bring in a contract staff to address these pressures. A budget request is included in the 3-year submission to formalize the staffing need. The fleet group maintains the city heavy-duty and light-duty vehicles, and in 2018 processed about 2,200 work orders. Moving on to human resources. As equity, inclusion, and a sense of belonging are Council's strategic priorities for the community and for all city business and operations, it is also a priority for the city staff community. Human resources is our lead on the diversity, equity, and inclusion work as outlined by the City Staff Task Force and being undertaken in 2020 and onwards, and it will support the organization in implementation of initiatives. Also, regularly undertaking health and safety risk assessment and hazard identification is essential to the well-being of our city staff community and for reducing the risk of workplace-related injuries. Human Resources invests its time in developing strong relations with all our labor groups, providing ongoing training and development to staff, and coaching and mentoring our management team in being effective people leaders. As we build a strong people-based culture, we expect to see a lower employee turnover, lower sick time used, and lower number of grievances advancing to arbitration. These are the measures HR uses to see the effectiveness of their work. Information technology, the priorities are listed here for the next 3 years. First and foremost would be an update of the 5-year city IT strategic plan, engaging all the operating divisions to understand their needs and priorities, reviewing best practices of our peers, and working within the financial capacity of the city. Refresh of the desktop and computers to replace aging infrastructure and to bring in newer technology. Refresh of the IT service desk to increase automation and efficiency in our workflow. Continued support of the open text system and related infrastructure refresh, and the GIS refresh to address growing demand for this service and to provide flexibility and scalability to meet future needs. IMTS monitors progress on the IT strategic plan under these 4 categories and has a dashboard to show progress that is reviewed by the IT steering committee of city staff. The key metrics are noted in the business plan. They have serviced over 3,800 help desk calls annually, and we have over 99% uptime for our city website. And last but not the least, Legislative Services Division. Key initiatives planned for the 3-year budget include addressing the increase in the number of MFIPA inquiries, that's under the Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, by developing an access to information and routine disclosure policy that would provide guidance on material that can be released without a formal request. And the most important project is the election, which is every 4 years. It's a very significant project for this team, and the work will be starting in July 2021 for the 2022 election. The progress that we measure is been seen through the number of marriage licenses issued, the ceremonies performed, and we've seen considerable success in the number of marriages performed at City Hall. And finally, moving to community impact, looking at this from a departmental level, and the community for corporate services is our city staff community. The services that are provided, especially by our human resources team, has a significant impact on our staff community. We see it in various ways. The HR team builds strong relationship with all our unions and associations based on trust and engagement, and this has helped us in securing agreement with all our labor groups in 2019. The Human Resources team is working with staff through training and workshop to address recent changes to the WSIB provisions and to address issues of chronic mental stress and to develop wellness strategies. And they're working with our management staff on coaching, mentoring, and being better people leaders and helping employees achieve positive outcomes and contributing to the psychological wellness in the workplace. And with this, I'm open to any questions. Actually, it will be our corporate services leadership team that is sitting right here, that we are ready and able to answer any questions that you might have on our business plan and our budget.
Thank you very much, Ms. Patel. Looking to council for questions. Councillor Bassett.
Thanks through you, Councillor Chair Henry. I'm surprised, I guess, by how the comments I get about the budget tend to be concerns from people that we have far too many staff who are working ineffectively. My apologies. I'm just providing feedback. I don't believe that, and I'm not seeing that as a councillor. But huge concern that there's so many requests for new staff. And so one in particular that I was interested in, just in terms, if maybe you can give me an example. So the network analyst position, B39, we're a tech community, and so I would hope that we're well serviced internally for all sorts of support, network support, and any other tech needs. So I was just curious how we are serviced, perhaps in comparison to some of our local comparators, if we are well serviced, or if we are far too serviced and if we need to scale it back a little bit. So if you could provide a little bit more context on that particular position for me, please.
Sure, I'll start it and then I will turn it over to Maxmin. So we're asking for a network analyst, and currently we have 2 network analysts that support 31 backend software. So that's a very high ratio that they're supporting, which is not the best way to be able to provide support to all our frontline users. And Max took a look at the number of staffing that we have in comparison to Kitchener and Cambridge. And then because Kitchener is almost double our size, we wanted to put it on a comparative basis. So we looked at it as a ratio of our population. So when you look at it as a population compared to 100,000 population, City of Waterloo has 15.1 IT staff on a population of 100,000. In comparison, Kitchener is at 24.4 for 100,000 population. Cambridge is at 23.1. So Kitchener and Cambridge are fairly well comparable in terms of their staffing level based on the ratio of population. But however, we are significantly understaffed on the IT side. And that's a very crucial investment that we need to make. And so you will see that there are 2 budget requests for 2 positions really in the 3-year time frame with respect to the IMTS team. Max, if you'd like to add anything else.
Through your Chair Henry to Councillor Vazek, and Cashler have described the need of, because we currently have 47 backend applications, and this position will also support the ongoing need for the support for open text system. And also in 2016, we have consolidated our telephone system across all 16 facilities into one voice over IP based centralized systems. Before that, we were using Bell Canada to do the support for all the facilities other than City Hall. So basically, IMTS is only supporting the telephone need for City Hall. And back then, the only need we have is config extensions and terminate telephones, or if there's any issues, we just fix the telephone line itself. But after we consolidate all the telephone service into a centralized voice over IP system, it becomes the telephone system becomes a unified communication systems. So it's tied up. It's integrated into our email system, and the voicemail can be directly into emails, and also it provides the teleconference capabilities. So this position will also support the need for at least like 30% of one's FTE to support the whole organization on the telephone need as well.
Thanks, that's really helpful. Sounds like there's a big need. What are the risks of not, if council weren't to support this position, what are some of the risks to the city?
We will still support all those needs, but it will be just instead of the service level will be decreased. And we may need to ask some external consultant to help us on some initiatives. And for small projects, that's not an issue. But for a big project, for example, open text, right? If we're so dependent on the consulting companies or temporary staff, and we train someone and they leave, every time you run into an issue, right? You hire someone to come in, you have to train them how to use the system or how to understand our system infrastructure. That's kind of a waste of time, and that will over time it will waste resource.
Through you, Chair Henry, if I could add to, from my own personal experience, OpenText, as I understand, we started the implementation back in 2010, and we're still struggling with the implementation, and really it's because of a lack of resources. And I can say when I started with the city too, we were starting with Maximo implementation. That also was taking a lot of time to implement, but when we dedicated and added 2 staff for Maximo, the system has really taken off, and we are really much further ahead with the rollout. So the issue really, the impact is we're going to be extremely slow in implementing any kind of software and technology. And these are technologies that are needed in the system, and being in a tech community, it is a bit awkward when we aren't able to roll out these things fast enough.
And then I have Councillor Henry.
Thank you, Chair Henry. Through you, I have a comment and then 2 questions. Ms. Patel, I won't ask you to answer the question, but my same comment about where it's possible to begin creating, based on information that we have, to begin creating targets rather than just telling us the numbers of things that we did. So I'll just leave it there. From your perspective, we've got a large number of a couple of really large projects that are going to come to implementation over the next 2 years. We've talked about the rec complex and the East Side Library. And so just making sure that we've got contingencies in place should anything go awry, if things are not on target or if it gets delayed for whatever reason. From your perspective, do we have those contingencies in place, or are there some areas for concern?
Through you, Chair Henry, with respect to those 2 projects, they are fully funded at this point in time. And I think Commissioner Dykstra can speak to it in terms of where we are with WMRC and the bids that are coming in. So we're working through some of those things. To the extent that they stay within the project budget, we are in good shape financially to be able to deliver on the projects. But I think we're at such an early stage, so it's kind of hard to know how the projects are going to shape out. So I could turn to Commissioner Dykstra to see if he has any more insight, because it would be managed by facility and design management in his team.
Yes, through the chair to the councillor. Yes, on the same front as Commissioner Patel alluded to, with the budgets they've been set in the tendering process right now for WMRC, future for the library. But as those come in, if there's, with the competitive market, if we need to respond to it, we'll look at whether it's scope, if that needs to be reviewed and considered. Also, is there opportunity for some engineering efficiencies when you now to integrate the entire project team with contractor, architect, our staff too. So there's measures in place that we look into to make sure we're responding to the market.
Thank you. I appreciate the efforts are always to make sure that we are coming in on budget as we've planned. But with any large project, you always worry about what's the plan B if something goes awry. And it leads to our earlier conversation a little bit about the priority of some of the other projects that are coming on stream and whether one of our backup plans may have to be to slow something down to enable a project that's already well underway. But I appreciate the fact that we'll be managing it very effectively. My second question is about the DC charges and really more the introduction of the community benefit charges. And I'm understanding that we don't really know all of those details yet, but from what you know now, and I'm just trying to rationalize what we're able to be spending or using the DC charges to, and then what seems to be contemplated for the community benefit charge. From your perspective, again, what are the gaps that we're potentially going to see, or are there those questions being put forward to those that are higher than we are and putting the regulations in place? just trying to get a picture of where we think we might be a year from now, having the conversation and relying on the community benefit charges to cover some of our issues.
Through you, Chair Henry, the DC study, I mean, just looking at it from different angles, when we look at the development charge study that's been done, we've done it from the perspective of looking at soft services charged separate from the hard services. And it is the soft services charge that is going to be eliminated, along with the cash in lieu of Parkland, as well as Section 37 monies that we do receive for increased density and bonusing. So with respect to looking at hard services, when I look at the balances in the capital budget with respect to the DC and hard services, it is going into the deficit, but because the hard services are still going to continue, I'm not particularly concerned about the fact that we have a deficit in there. On the soft services side, yes, we are encountering some of the deficits, but at the same time, those projects are all non-routine projects, and we do come back to council with respect to getting approval to specifically proceed with that project. So there are enough checks and balances in place. Those projects are not going to be really proceeding right away. They will be coming back to council, and as the CBC regulations come out, we will certainly be monitoring and be providing a report to council. And I would also turn to Ms. Reynolds, because I know she's been more involved in the CBC and in working with our consultant on with respect to the development charges in CBC.
Thank you, Commissioner Patel. And through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor Hanmer, I certainly agree with what Commissioner Patel has relayed here. I will say that in this upcoming year, we will know more, and that will be reflected in whether or not we decide that we need to come back with revisions to the capital program for 2021 and 2022. So that's something that we had communicated to Council in 2019, that it's quite possible that we may need to come back and look at those DC-funded projects for soft services, certainly, to determine whether things are going to change with respect to that landscape in those couple of years of Council's term that are beyond 2020. So that's certainly something that, in addition to coming back with council reports for non-routine projects, that we would expect that could certainly be something that would happen, and that will be determined by the legislation as far as what that charge will look like, what that will do with our revenues, and whether we see, there being some risk to taking forward the capital program in those years that we've currently devised. So I think that between all of those various pieces, that council's well positioned to make decisions on this in the next year or two, and basically be flexible to what those changes might be.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that it is a bit of a chicken and egg and a wait and see. I do feel comforted and have some confidence that you've thought through the what ifs, and there's a lot of checks back to council that should something not go as we had anticipated, we've got that opportunity to take a look at it. I think it also gives us that opportunity to start communicating to the broader public what DC charges are, what still is going to be in place, and what these community benefit charges make. And just even having these kind of conversations and having more of them, I think will be really helpful too. So thank you. That's it.
I don't have anyone else on my speakers list. Okay. I'm looking for other questions from Councillor Bonagor and Councillor Bonnelly.
Through you, Chair Henry. This is a broad question, and it may not even be answerable at this point, but we're heading into the Lean Six Sigma process, the intent of which is to find ways to streamline our processes, look for systems or procedures that could be improved. Is it possible to forecast how that could impact your business plans and or your budget, given that I assume yours may be the business department that could be impacted most through Lean Six, given that you support everyone else?
Through you, Chair Henry, to Councillor Bonagor. I could certainly articulate my thoughts with respect to Lean Six Sigma, because we've attended the Lean Six Sigma Forum, I think that was in Fredericton last year, as well as I've talked to City of Kitchener, region of Waterloo, Mississauga, St. John's. So I've had numerous conversations while we were researching the whole Lean Six Sigma initiative. When it comes to implementing Lean Six Sigma, it is a huge culture shift for the organization as a whole. We have been focused on continuous improvement, but it's a very different structured methodology when you start looking at Lean Six Sigma and you look at the different tools and techniques that are available to implement it. So the first and foremost step would be for us to even have a citywide program that says what are the kind of levels of training that we want to provide, who do we want to provide it to, how are we going to monitor it. So we need to start developing that whole program. So we're at a very fundamental stage in that ECMT has taken the yellow belt training. All of us have had that training and certification. And we've done a few pilot projects too, but we do not have a city program. So in my mind, I think it's almost going to take a year or two to be able to develop that program, to train enough staff on that lean yellow belt or green belt, and to build that kind of momentum with respect to initiatives. We need to also set up a steering committee that evaluates different projects that are there. So I've been talking to my former colleagues in the city of Mississauga. They have a steering committee that looks at different projects. They compete for different projects, or rather different projects compete to get the training, because when you have the project submitted, the staff are appropriately trained at that time. So there has to be a lot of investment of time and resources to be able to get that program to have a momentum, to be then able to say, yes, we're going to see some of the benefits. So we had a fleet review done, I think, in 2017, and there were areas identified for improvement. We used that opportunity to say, let's pilot it there. We don't have any particular area right now to be able to say, where would we want to start it? It doesn't have to be in corporate services. When I spoke to the colleagues in region of Waterloo, it was ambulance services that they took a look at. They took a look at a whole lot of frontline operations. And for that matter, we use it even for our winter control. So it is every single operation that can be looked at with that lens with respect to continuous improvement, and to actually track and document processes and what the savings are. So it's not limited to corporate services, it is really citywide, and I think that's where that position is in the CAO department, because it's a very citywide project. But it starts with a huge culture change and a culture shift, and a formal program being developed to track, to monitor, to encourage, and to keep it going.
Then I have Councillor Bodley.
Thank you, through you, Chair Henry. A question about the two IT positions. Through conversations that we've had, one of the challenges, I guess, of being in a tech community is that we are competing with the private sector for these really highly qualified professionals to be working in our IT department, and often the private sector is willing to pay significantly more. Are you confident that the funding that we have set aside for these positions is going to be sufficient to attract the right people that we need for these positions?
Through your Chair, Henry, to Councillor Bodley, we do go through the job evaluation process where we look at the different positions. And then based on the job evaluation process, a certain pay band is associated with that position. And then there's also a market salary survey that is done, which again looks at what the market is for these kind of positions. So I would, I guess, turn to both Kathy Wiedhaus, our Director of HR, as well as Max, to be able to speak. From the process standpoint, that's the process that HR does, which they assure us that it does give us a comparable salary. It is quite possible in the private sector, because I was there for a short while too, there could be bonuses that you're paid, which is not there in the public sector. So there would be some differences, but I think we've done our best in terms of our process to make sure that through our job evaluation process and market salary survey to bring it as comparable as we could.
Okay, thank you. And one other question through you, Chair Henry. This is around the procurement piece, and develop, implement, and maintain a social procurement program. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit more to what the intended outcomes are for that with respect to potentially how it might help us in our climate emergency declaration.
Through you, Chair Henry. We're in obviously very early stages. This initiative is dependent on resources, but the intent of a social procurement program is to leverage off of communities, the money that we're spending on projects to benefit the community. So that can look at different ways. It can look at rewarding suppliers who are building in community benefit into their submissions, perhaps through talent creation, using apprenticeship programs. Another part would be we could develop a list of diverse suppliers. Wouldn't have to be a closed list, but determine what the will of council is, who are diverse suppliers who need support, and we can look at implementing ways to increase opportunities for those suppliers to bid on or be successful in responding to some of our procurement opportunities. Different values could be put in place to determine when and how that was used. So again, it's early stages. It's an emerging trend in the procurement world. We've been talking a lot about it at our co-op meetings. There is a desire regionally to look at it, but people haven't put a lot of resources into it. It's an opportunity that Waterloo could take the lead, perhaps as a joint initiative, to bring it forward and work with our comparable municipalities on that.
Yeah, and I have Councillor Freeman for a comment, and then I'll have some questions.
Through Chair Henry, I just wanted to thank the communications team for the revised format for the business plan and also the finance team. I think this so much better aligns with the budget documents and outlines how it is that strategically we're seeking to implement council's strategic plan through our budget. And so I know it took work to do that alignment, and I just wanted you to know how much I appreciated it.
I think that's something I'm happy to echo. I mean, I'll say I changed my process of review of the budget this year because the business plans were much closely aligned. I could lead myself through them rather than around them and just sort of glance at them. They're more than communication tools. They're reflective of where we're going.
And in that vein, I think that when we have questions like you're having with regard to the alignment to the declaration of the climate emergency, I think we can see that. Like, I can certainly see that in the business plans. I can see it in our investment in things like active transportation, the investment related to clearing of active transportation trailways in terms of, like, under the procurement piece, even things like monitoring road salt usage, and all of those elements. I think they're pieces, and I appreciate Councillor Bodley raising these because I think they're really pieces about getting back to Councillor Hamner's question around tracking and actually taking credit for a lot of that work we're doing, because I think we're doing a lot more than we're communicating more broadly around a lot of these initiatives. But I just really, I'm very, very thankful for the change in the budget documents this year.
And through you, Chair Henry, thank you to Council for providing us clear feedback, because it gives us guidelines and a roadmap as to what you'd like changed. So we certainly do appreciate the feedback we get from Council.
And so I just have a couple of questions as well before we wrap this section. I'll pick up on social procurement since it's hot on the conversation. I think this perhaps is more of a comment now, given Councillor Bodley's already provided the Q&A that I had lined up in my head. I think the joint initiative is an exciting opportunity for Waterloo to lead. And often others of our neighbours are great at communicating that they are leading on certain important initiatives for our community. This is one we should communicate that we are trying to lead on the community, because it really is a very progressive way to think about leveraging the dollars we already spend to maximize benefit in community, not just get the work done. The one piece I wanted to raise here as an opportunity, and we certainly heard from Tracy that this is something that will need to come back so that council can clearly set some goals. I think it's really important as we set goals that we deeply engage the community to set those goals, because it's them who are benefiting, and it's typically the members of the community that we don't engage well often, and they don't self-engage with us, who need the most benefit. And we need to understand that as we choose which kinds of community benefits we're prioritizing in our process and setting in our policy toolkit, they reflect our community's desires and needs. so that that's what we're meeting and not our sense of what the community needs. We have to do that work. And on the community economic development front that I was raising earlier, I think this is an excellent opportunity to do really that grassroots community economic development and supporting people to be ready to engage on social procurements, because we need organizations to bid on this that will help achieve what the community's objectives are. So I think there's really some strong opportunities for linkage to drive equity and inclusion piece through our significant procurement spend if we do this right. And if that takes a little bit longer so that we can have it be really meaningful when we set policy, that it will reflect what the community needs, I think we'll get even more out of it in the long run, and a lot of buy-in from the people who need it most. But my other one was a question for Tracy around on the fleet side, which was in the fleet greening initiative. My understanding is the fleet greening initiative is targeted towards our heavy vehicles, which I know there's a lot more work that needs to be done in industry to really have electrification of those kinds of pieces. But I'm wondering where we are on light duty vehicles. We're seeing building go forward and have electric vehicles, but where are we and where is fleet on looking at EV procurement expansion into our light duty fleet?
Through you, or to you, Councillor Henry. Our fleet is comprised of various types of equipment. So in addition to heavy duty, there are what you call light duty, but they're not cars. A lot of our light duty vehicles would be pickup trucks. And at this point in time, pickup trucks are really not a candidate for electric vehicles. There's a lot of investigation in right now, and they're looking at pickup trucks coming in 2021. Nissan may have one now, but it's only in China. And the cost is $80,000 to $129,000 for a pickup truck. So it's just really not something that's currently on the table. We could start looking at some of our smaller equipment, but really the bulk of our fleet is our pickup trucks and the higher end vehicles, street sweepers, things like that.
Yeah, I think that's fair to keep our eye on, and a 2022 timeline for taking a review is probably right on the vast majority of these. But I do note as we look through our CapEx spend, we do have vehicle replacements that are cars or utility vehicles in bylaw and in other places that do come up for replacement every year. And while that's not a big dent, we saw from our carbon footprint, it's this much. It's not nothing. And I would look to see what opportunities we have and what barriers we have in procuring those in the same way that building did in these cycles. Because if it's that we haven't taken a life cycle approach to looking at the replacement cost, so it looks more expensive. We haven't taken an internal cost of carbon approach to looking at it, in which case it's definitely more expensive relative to the carbon generation. We need to start getting a handle on that and not have vehicles we'll still have around for 6 or 7 years if we don't have to. So I would look for what opportunities we have in this budget cycle to start advancing beyond just building services.
I have had some high-level conversations with bylaw enforcement. Another consideration is to keep in mind is if we were able to move some of the SUVs that they have to electric vehicles, we currently don't have charging stations for those electric vehicles. And that particular business unit runs a lot 24/7. So we need to kind of understand how we would charge, how long that would take in order to. So there's other infrastructure and there's other considerations rather than just switching right over. Fodder
for conversation. Okay, that's what I had on fleet, and the last one I had was for Max. I think it's been noted by others that there are some large capital spends here to improve that fleet. Virtualization was one of them, and when I looked at it's in both G12 on the operating side and 447 on the capital side. It notes that we'd have some savings anticipated versus the status quo. I'm wondering if Max, if you could speak to what those look like. Just so we get a sense of what that means.
To your chair, Henry, virtualization is utilize the physical infrastructure. It can enable utilize the physical infrastructure more effectively. There's two parts of the virtualization. One part is infrastructure virtualization. That's more focused on the back end. And the other part is desktop virtualization. That's a two separate project. But in the back end, there's a possibility that we could join them together. But at this point, they have different they have separate infrastructure to make sure that the back end and front end do not have impact each other. Did that answer your question?
I think looking at where the savings were versus the status quo, since this is sort of replacing the individual physical pieces or servers with the more consolidation and back end.
Yes, the saving is more from the hardware maintenance cost, and from the ease of management from staff point. If we, for example, if we manage 100 individual servers, right, and that will use use a lot of our resource to do that. But if we virtualize them together, we have one portal to manage all 100 or even 200 machines. And on the other hand, virtualization can utilize the hardware platform more effectively. Like for example, before each server, this server is 90% utilized, that server is 60% utilized. You really cannot, very hard to use that 30% or 40% of the free resource. But with the virtualized environment, you put all the hardware into a pool and you can more effectively utilize those resources. And from licensing perspective, you just need to either purchase more license, either purchase less license, or consolidate current license, and to save money.
Yeah.
The capacity building.
And I think that's sort of helpful to flag, given the spend is not insignificant, but that there are benefits there. I know that IT certainly had a backlog and infrastructure gap, just like everyone else. And this sounds to me from the hardware and the other pieces that this is also a way to tackle the infrastructure gap inside ITMS. So that's good. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
I think we've wrapped our questions on corporate services. I'm not seeing anyone else, and I know that the library chair is very anxious to get up. I've been getting the eye as she's been standing up and wandering around. So I want to thank our corporate services team today and every day for the work that you do to keep the corporation running, and we'll get the presentation flipped around, and we will hear from the library on their business plan.
Thank you, Chair Henry. And good afternoon, Council, Mayor Jaworski, Mr. Anderson. It's nice to be here with all of you today. So here we are. You can go to the next slide. It's okay. I got nothing for that one. So here to present the business plan on behalf of our entire team at the Waterloo Public Library. As you know, I am the chair of the Waterloo Public Library, but also joined by Laurie Clark, our CEO. And I believe our goal is stated there. Our goal is to be a transformational force in the development of Waterloo and its citizens. And that was a goal that we embraced, I guess, about 9 or 10 years ago when we did a really big reset with our strategic planning. And it's something I think that we are enormously successful at. And I look forward to many more years of seeing us be a transformational force in the development of our community. Our services that we provide, in general, we support and fulfill the multiple literacy needs of our community, including digital literacy. And literacy will always be our first and foremost, our focus at the library. Everything else feeds into that. We offer access to information to all of our citizens, provide a safe public space that welcomes everyone. We create an environment that encourages discovery, innovation, lifelong learning, and collaboration. And I'll add delight, because that's something that we talk about a lot. And we partner to provide crucial settlement services for newcomers in our community. You may have heard we're getting a new library. And it's just so exciting. When I saw this page, I thought, Tony, it's so beautiful. Your team, where's Tony? He just left. Yeah, love seeing the banner with our beautiful library on there. As you know, we are moving forward with Eastside Branch Library, and for the I would say that it will be our key initiative for the next couple of years as we work to get get those doors opened. It's very exciting for Councillor Freeman and myself. Measuring progress, we have always been very diligent about collecting a lot of statistics. Many are required by bigger bodies than us. We are always one of the library systems in this province that is on an upward trajectory. Every time that we gather with our colleagues from across the province, they always hold up the Waterloo Public Library as a great example of a library that's moving forward and making a positive impact on our community through engagement. As an example, our total visitors in 2018, close to 1.5 million. Number of new library cards issued, 8,748. Numbers of items circulated, above 1.5 million. Our programs are so well subscribed. If you follow us on our Instagram and all our social media channels, you'll see that we do the craziest things, and they are loved. They are loved by members of our community. Things that you won't even imagine that are offered through the library, and because we can do things on a scale that we like to pilot and test things, and we're able to do that and engage people across all sorts of interests and keep people really participating in what we're doing. It's almost 1,600 programs offered in 2018 by the Public Library with over 50,000 participants. That's an amazing number. Obviously our digital services are high. Computer and Wi-Fi users, over 350,000 in 2018, and we expect, again, those numbers to continue to grow incrementally over time. Next, please. Our impact, again, is huge. We are really a transformational force in this community. The Waterloo Public Library plays an invaluable role in the social infrastructure of this city, acting as a buffer against loneliness and isolation while providing a place for collaboration and innovation. It speaks so strongly to your strategic plan that the library as a place that can support everything that the city does in order to support their citizens. It's a space that welcomes all, creating a sense of belonging and community while offering equitable access for everyone, and that is the beauty of a public library. Beyond that, that's a very brief presentation. If you have any questions, Lori or Kim would love to answer them. Kim is our finance.
So if we asked about exactly where every last penny in those innumerable budget sheets you have, that's your bag, former finance chair CN? Okay. Mayor Jaworski.
Well, thank you very much through the chair to the chair for this presentation. As you know, the library board and the library itself and this council are very concerned about the cost of the materials, the online materials and we've lobbied against them. Is there any light at the end of the tunnel of that pressure for libraries both here and everywhere?
I would say that it's a slow moving piece, and I think the steady advocacy work that's being done at the provincial level, at the library level, and across municipal councils may move us slowly in that direction, but I don't think we're seeing any action on it.
It's too bad.
Does everybody know what we're talking about there? The price of ebooks? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Lori, anything to add to that? No. Yeah. Slow moving topic. I don't see it. I don't think people see it. The people who need to see it as a priority won't see it as a priority unless we keep up the pressure.
And then one operational question. When a person returns 2 books to the library and then his wife tells him that one's actually for KPL and it's already gone.
We send it along.
Okay, good.
We send it along.
Good news. That was this weekend. Thank you.
Was that recently?
In this case, you might want to flag that one, return it to the mayor, and tell him to give it to Barry, and Barry can take care of it. That could be a value-added piece. I have Councillor Vass.
Following along those not so serious lines, I love the library, and it is a safe space. And without the library this past year, I would not have done my dissertation proposal, and it was literally the only safe space for me to do it, and not in a physical or emotional safe space, but I couldn't be at home because I would wash the floors, which I never do, and I couldn't be here because it's taxpayer money, so I can't work on my dissertation here, and I couldn't be at the faculty where I could work because there are other colleagues there, and we just commiserate about the dissertation. And so it really is a safe space for everyone, like people who are underhoused or experiencing homelessness. It's a safe space for very sad PhD students, and so welcoming. And I knew that it was just a place I just felt like, okay, I can go there, I can do this, and I felt welcome and I felt supported without ever talking to anyone when I was there.
That's awesome.
So it's a beautiful resource to have in this community. I'm so excited for it.
And I'm excited about seeing that expand to your side of town too. Yeah, it's wonderful. My kids are great examples too. I know if either of them, so my youngest is now a teacher, my daughter works for another municipality in this immediate vicinity. If they have work to do, they head to the library, and they know that that's the place to go. Yeah, yeah.
Through you, Chair Henry. Thank you for all of the updates, and I also just want to give you a shout out for putting together such a great collection at our libraries. I hear from a good number of people just how much they appreciate just the pure range and depth of the collection that you put together. So
that's awesome.
Thank you. I do have a question though, and it's very kind of straight and boring. So Karen, you may want to punt it, but it's just about the funding for the RFID system, and this is just for my information. Like, it's every 5 years that that the request comes up. Is that just a symptom of the life cycle of these systems? Is it how the vendors have set it up? Are we a little bit at their mercy? Can you just explain why it's every 5 years?
I will pass that to Lori because it is an operational question. So did you want to quickly, I could make a guess at it, but I will let Lori handle that. Sorry while I do this.
Through you, Chair Henry. What you mentioned is true. It's a life cycle. And that's really how there's improvements, there's changes, and we try to keep up with that so that you are correct in that.
Okay. We cycle through a lot of books. And I do remember, because those of you who are interested in how when we opened the library on the east side, when we opened the library on the west side, we started collecting materials for months and months and months ahead of time, and they were stored. And the RFID process was done off-site before they ever landed in the library. And I remember that. Do you remember that, Lori? It was so cool to kind of see the onboarding process. So keep an eye out for that. It'll be very exciting to get all that new stuff.
Through Chair Henry, I am an avid ebook reader, as I've never hidden that.
Do you read them, or do you just check them out and let them sit on your iPad?
I took that one on the chin. I understand that when you take out an ebook, if you don't read it, they pay for it, whether you read it or not. So never take it out unless you read it.
Thank you, Councillor.
But in the vein of a really large collection, the ebook collection is huge, and I wanted to talk a bit more about the programming. Like, I think the numbers are even understated in terms of how many people access the programming at the library. They run knitting classes. They run let me fix your knitting project classes. They're running historical tours, and a lot of times people talk about the Jane's Day tours. Jane's Walks, but the library's doing them all year round, and they're in that same vein of exploring the community in all the seasons. And I know that on the east side, like, I know that the citizens on the east side are really they don't even necessarily know all those programs yet, because the communications have been focused more broadly in the areas where we do have branches. And so it's going to be very exciting.
Certainly is.
Yeah.
Are there any tough questions for?
I don't work for you,
library folks. I'm not seeing anything further. So while we're sharing stories, I'll just mention one before Christmas. I happened into the library with my normal accessory.
Which one do you go to, Jeff?
We've been mostly going to Main Branch because it's on the main line from the bus route. We'll now have different options to consider starting tomorrow, thanks to various things that I'll look in Mayor Jaworski's direction to solve for me so I can still get around the city. But we stumbled in just on a regular time, and there was a Christmas program being run, or a holiday-themed sort of program being run, and we sort of joined into all of that. The room was absolutely packed full of kids. If you could stack them 3 levels high, you could have, and still filled the room. And we managed to survive long enough not to sing Jingle Bells, but to at least acquire the materials to assemble our own jingle bells. And then we've been proceeding to jingle them throughout Christmas. And sometimes
Nice.
while I'm trying to rock him to sleep, he'll demand to hold them when he sees them. And it's the cutest thing to have him, rock to while I'm, jingle them while I'm singing Jingle Bells, and then just fall asleep, just holding them right on his hand. So that was we didn't make it through the program. We had no hope with that many people in the room, but we did get a good takeaway from it that I know I've enjoyed and will keep enjoying. So thank you for that. And we're sorry about all the sand that isn't in the sandbox anymore.
Councillor Henry, my love affair with the Waterloo Public Library began when my eldest was probably the same age as Finn.
Yeah.
So with the children's programming, and now she's 27, going to be 28 soon. And it's a special place that's community, and I'm so proud to be part of it for so long, and very grateful for this council and your staff, Keshwar, for your support of our future plans. So thank you.
With that, we'll conclude section 5 of the agenda. There is no consent motion. There's no items removed from the consent motion. There are no additional staff reports. There's no public meetings, but there are notices of motion given at previous meeting. And thank you, Library, for joining us. We have first up from Councillor Hanmer, a review of Special Service Area Levy Policy.
Do I need, just from a process standpoint, do I need to read them?
Only if people are really enthused at listening for a while. So I'll look for a mover, Councillor Hanmer, and look for someone to second that, and then we can discuss and you can enter them. So seconded by, I saw Councillor Vasic's hand. She's trying to give it away, but I saw it. It was there. I saw it. You can't take it down. And I'll look to Councillor Hanmer to lead off.
Thank you. I just have just a few comments with this, and I suppose just a correction to the first one, which is on the SAL. We now have 4 home associations that are utilizing the SAL as of our last meeting. With respect to the motion itself, I feel that the timing is right for us to take a pause and look at what other options the city might have to support neighborhood associations or to put into the toolkit. We heard loud and clear that through the discussion of the Beechwood West 1 SAL, that the SAL was the last resort. And we've had a number of other initiatives come into play since that time, things like our strategic plan and things like the neighborhood strategy. So it's time to take a pause back. To the best of our knowledge, there are no other covenants that are coming due within the next 12 months. So there wouldn't be any groups that are disadvantaged by us taking a pause at this point in time. And there are no groups that are currently within the SAL. We have heard that there may be one considering something again. It's one that went through it before, but we're in consultation with Councillor Henry. It doesn't appear that may happen in the next year. So again, the timing is right. It also allows staff to consider the alignment with the recently approved strategic plan and our neighborhood strategy, and are we doing things across the entire city in a way that we want to be able to do. And I'd also like to suggest it allows staff to consider the impact that a SAL may have or a similar kind of process may have and other tools that are available on some other strategies that we know that are in the works, like a parkland strategy. And if an option, for example, in considering what might happen when a covenant comes due and what options might be to the home association if they can't keep it going, is it a parkland or how does that fit into all of it? So to me, it really fits with a good time to take a pause, and by giving the staff a year, I think it allows enough opportunity for internal consultation and potentially consultation with the home associations who may be considering it, or those that have already considered it and are taking advantage of it. So I'll stop at that point.
Any other comments from council on this item? I'll simply say I appreciate the opportunity for the review. I know that some homes associations do ask the city what beyond the SAL process there may be for them, and we do not have a whole lot to say historically. Doesn't mean we can't have a lot to say. I think this is an opportunity for us to fill out some of the messaging so that we can let neighborhoods decide for themselves what it is they want to do, which is always what this has been. but there may be some broader options that folks consider. And two of the things that I think are useful to think about and put on the table as part of the review is if there are a couple of homes associations next to each other that are struggling to maintain two facilities, what would it take for them to maintain one instead? And is there something to facilitate that? And the other one is for those that have such broad support and deep support that Common Element Condominium Corporation might be the right option for them, which doesn't involve the city. There are some costs there. How does the city play a role in facilitating that so that the liability and the participation never enters the corporation of the city of Waterloo and stays private where it needs to be? I think those are two options that some may consider and may think about through all of that. And I don't know where we'd land on them, but it's worth taking a look at because I know those are active possibilities for some, or at least were active possibilities for some alternative to a sale that didn't happen or haven't yet happened. Other comments? I saw Councillor Vassic.
Is the question okay now? Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm just curious about, through you, Chair Henry, who and how consultation will happen internally, externally. Is that something we need to think about now? Would it happen after? And how robust would that look, consultation?
Through Chair Henry to Councillor Vassic, I would say the consultation has begun already, both through Beth's team and our team. So we have been having these conversations with the homes associations over the past 12 months. We will continue to do that. I think our first step would be to have another meeting, discuss the motion, discuss options. There are a variety that the homes associations have told us about already, such as, facilitating joint lifeguard recruitments, simple things that our teams can help us with, everything through to what has been mentioned this evening. So we would start consultation immediately. As soon as we can pull together our internal resources, and that would continue throughout the process, because at the end of the day, it is about developing a toolkit that they can utilize.
Okay, and then what I'm hearing now, which I didn't quite get the sense of while reading this or getting background information, is that it sounds like the assumption under this is that SALs are here to stay. It's just a matter of how they're here to stay. So for me, the question is, what do we, as you're going through this, what I'd like to be considered, if that's possible, is what do we consider a public benefit? And do we consider recreation and parks to be a public benefit? And if we do, are SALs appropriate? I guess I'm thinking about it through the lens of equity and inclusion. And I understand the connection between condo buildings, but as we intensify and people are saying condo buildings are more and more unaffordable, so we're affording people in this community who have the means to do so to have additional recreational facilities. Do we think that's okay? I guess I'm just questioning the merits of SAL through the lens of equity and inclusion. So I would just ask that as you're doing this, if we were to approve it now, you just have that conversation. Is that something that would be appropriate to ask for?
Through the chair to Councillor Vassic, I think that we will be looking at everything, but I would say that, just for clarity, this is not about applying this to any new facilities. This is really looking at the existing homes associations and what role has the city played historically in that or wants to play in the future. And that's how I see this review.
Yeah, I mean, certainly from my reading, and I looked at Councillor Henry, if the question is to direct staff to review whether or not to eliminate the existing cells, then that would be something I don't read within here, but maybe it should be within there.
I think that really the intention with the review, through you, Chair Henry, is to look at what can we put in the toolkit, recognizing, and we'll take staff's recommendations on this, recognizing that we do have some associations who currently are going through the SAL process. With our existing SAL policy, the associations can also, even if they have one, can opt out at some point. So I think by reviewing the whole piece that we have, that may allow those opportunities to come forward. But it does really, right now, only it's only directed at potentially 12 or 13 home associations that were established with covenants. And as we all know, we don't have those anymore within the city. So I appreciate that it may seem a little exclusive, but it's dealing with one particular area. And I think the clerk's response to new properties, this particular policy wouldn't apply to new endeavors. It's really just as potentially one of the tools that might be in a toolkit that can help neighborhood and home associations. And so where appropriate with the recommendations, aligning with the neighborhood strategy, if it is able to be extended across the entire city, I would think that we would want to be doing that piece as well. Yeah.
So it's on the table, having been moved and seconded. I'll look for the vote. All those in favor? Okay, that's everyone. And second, even more exciting, corporate policy manual review. You bring the most exciting stuff to our table, Councillor Hanmer. I'll look again for a mover and then a seconder. Moved by Councillor Hanmer, seconded by Councillor Bonagor. And go ahead, Councillor Hanmer.
I know I think I am the only person who might get excited about policies and bylaw review, but anyway. And Julie, to help it along. Council has recently approved, as we've talked about, our strategic plan with 6 strategic pillars and 7 principles. We are committed to, as a council, to making any decisions that we make to support and further advance the achievement of these goals and strategic plans. Staff are also committed to advancing the strategic plan as directed by us. So they need to have and to know that they've got policies and procedures that are going to support their initiatives and not block their initiatives. And it's not that there's anything being done in an intention to do that. It's just we pass a whole lot of policies and procedures, and often we don't step back and take a look at where we are. Developing a plan to review the corporate policy manual allows a prioritization of which policies to review that support the alignment and implementation of our strategic goals and help us make sure that we are achieving, in particular, plans such as the climate adaptation plan, the diversity, equity, and inclusion work that's going on throughout the city, and there are many other things that are coming forward. We all know and have echoed that diversity, inclusion, and equity is a key strategy and a guiding principle for council and staff. Our HR policies would be part of the corporate policy manual, and one, by way of example, one of the policies that staff have wanted to review is respectful behavior. Are we making sure that we're meeting all those principles? And by asking for a plan on how we may be accomplishing that, I think it allows us to prioritize that particular policy as a higher priority to review. And it might just be one of those sort of quick wins to do. Doing a policy review is basically good governance. And as governors for the city of Waterloo, it is something that we should be taking a look at and making sure that it is encouraging us and helping us with our decision making. At this stage with the motion, we're not asking for the policy review to be completed. We are asking that a plan be put together on how the review will be done. And it's been narrowed to the corporate policy manual. And I will admit, when I say narrowed, I did get support from the council, from the clerks, that narrowing it still could be quite a number of policies in the hundreds potentially, but doable. It also allows, with the plan, we'll be looking at who's going to be involved in it, who's in doing the review, who is going to be consulted as the policies are undertaken. What are the criteria for including the policies to be reviewed? For example, some of the policies in our corporate manual are legislated, and we really are not going to tackle things with the provincial government, so those would be put aside, that those are out of our control. There are some that are very technical in nature, and again, the same thing, it doesn't fit the lens that we want it to be looked at. So it's to enable an opportunity to put together a plan on how we might do the review, make sure that we are filling out our fiduciary responsibilities as governors for the corporation of the City of Waterloo, and that's where we are at. Thank you.
Mayor?
Thanks. I think, this it certainly is wise to review policies, and I think this is a wise thing to do in light of the changes that we've made in strategic plans, particularly this term of council. The one thing I would just suggest to CAO or to clerks is that I think we realize this comes at a cost of something, whether it be resources or maybe funding from council contingency, since it's a priority for us. And so I just like that to be part of it too. And I think from an expectation part, we know this isn't going to be 100 policies or 50 policies or 20 policies. It's going to be a handful of key policies. So I think that's to set council's expectation that we're going to move forward, but on I wouldn't say even the low-hanging fruit. If it was low-hanging fruit, we would have done it already. But whatever's most beneficial to the community and to this council.
Councillor Veith?
Through you, Chair Henry, 6 months seems like not very far away. I was just wondering, is that feasible for staff, or is I don't know. I'd be happy to make it a year, 12 months.
How about I reframe to Mr. Anderson and ask for CAO's sort of response to the motion in general and Councillor Henry's comments.
Thanks, Chair Henry. I think maybe just kind of working backwards, we did have a bit of a chance to chat with Councillor Hanmer, and so understanding the intent of the resolution in terms of us developing a work plan that would scope down our efforts on the corporate policy review. I think, as Mayor Jaworski noted, we too anticipate it will be filtered to a number of policies and not the whole breadth. I think there's approximately 80 policies in total that we're talking about within the corporate policy framework, some of which are probably on our horizon for review in any event. If you reviewed all the budget documents, you would have seen a discussion paper, for instance, on the facility rental discount, which is one of the policies within there. So some of it may have naturally been occurring over our cycle, and I think we just need some time to build out the work plan and bring back what we think is an appropriate cadence of review and again, narrowing the scope so that we can really hone in on those priority areas. Maybe I can turn it to Julie in terms of any specific details, but we think too, as Mayor Jaworski had noted, there's an impact one way or another, whether it's time internally or external resources or additional resources to help move through the process. So we want to be mindful of that. These aren't just in the clerk's area in terms of deployment. We'll probably need a cross-functional team as we go forward. So those are my remarks.
Through the chair to Councillor Rees, I would just echo that there are a large number of policies that were set to be reviewed this year in any event, and I think that it is not difficult to identify those that would be most relevant to this type of review. I would like to mention that there is a budget request for Director of Strategic Initiatives, and we see that position as potentially being involved in this type of review. So if there was a delay to the 6-month timeline, it may only be pending that decision of council and the time that it may take to hire that individual that would likely want to be involved in this type of report. But in any event, we would report back to council if we did not anticipate meeting the 6-month deadline. But it would be our goal, and we don't see any issues with that at this time.
Just to be clear, we're not asking for the review to be completed. It's just to develop the plan, and the plan itself may take a couple of years to actually execute, depending on priorities. So, thank you.
And certainly the FRD review alone is not a small impact in terms of we can think that we know what the right thing is, but there's a whole lot external to the organization that would be engaged. And some are probably exclusively internal, some are big, heavy lifting, fill the chamber's potential if we get it wrong kinds of policies. So the only thing I wanted to flag in terms of my support of the motion that's here and that Mr. Anderson raised is what comes back in 6 months includes a sense of the trade-offs. And I know often when council asks staff to do things, staff take on the work and do them and try to figure it out, whether that's working an extra few hours, whether that's working a lot of hours for a long period of time, whether that's letting other things slide and nobody really knows about it. I think it's really important that we know what the trade-off is when this comes back so that we can provide appropriate direction and see if the plan that staff have to deal with this works or might harm specific kinds of initiatives that council would prefer to see move forward rather than some additional review. I think that's the table I want to see set by this, so that we can make appropriate decisions on whether to move forward. So I haven't seen any further comments. I'll take the vote. All those in favor? That's everyone. We have no further notices of motions, no communications and correspondence or unfinished business. Are there any questions, Council? Councillor Freeman?
Yeah, I had some questions with regard to parked cars on our streets during a snow emergency. I'm really concerned about that. It is inefficient for us to have to return to those streets with plows. Furthermore, the air emissions from those plows cycling through those streets more than once is problematic. So I'd like to know if we have a strategy for managing this issue.
Through the chair to the councillor, yes, on the parking front, we work closely with IPPW Transportation and issued the appropriate parking bans. A definite challenge where cars are being parked on the streets for whatever reason. Our staff and enforcement do go out and start to engage in a process, whether it's a notification, and if we need to get tagged and towing more, that is there in terms of tools within bylaws ability. So I can take that away and understand and work with the director to get some more details on what level of service is being provided now, and if there's rooms for improvement as well, I can do that to council.
Other questions? Seeing none, I'll look to Councillor Freeman for some new business.
So thank you, Chair Henry. So I did want to pass my comments on to IPPW in terms of thanking them for the work on the snow removal, and also to your team, Commissioner Dykstra, with regard to the trail system. But I would like to raise it to everyone's attention that with the strike tomorrow, our active transportation corridors are going to become more relied upon. And I think that we need to, in the short term, maybe have a coming together of the minds in terms of how it is we might be prioritizing the clearing of those routes. And I think that when we have to do a full plow, it's not uncommon for us to call in contracted staff to assist us in undertaking that snow removal in a faster process. And we might need to do that on our AT routes as well. I had a pretty difficult time getting in today. I shared those experiences with Commissioner Dykstra, where there's entire sections of what I would refer to as our AT highway that weren't clear, and I'm just worried about that, because people are going to be striving to get to a vehicle that is operating. That might be the Ion, or they're going to be having to walk. And I think we need to think about how we're facilitating that.
Through the chair to Councillor Freeman, the point noted, we will work with the team to advise them to do all they can through these hours of some challenges with the GRT, recognizing we will have more users. I've already this afternoon sent out a note to the director to understand what's the plan for the coming days with respect to clearing and where we're at, so I can advise on that as well.
Within our winter control reserve, are there resources available to Commissioner Dykstra's team if we need to have increased contract staff through that? Because I really truly believe that these will be very relied upon, these routes.
Yes, the winter control reserve is for times when we need to provide some additional service, and working with our staff, whether it's additional call-ins, we'd probably work through that first and see what resources we could get. If there's resource alignments with transportation as well, we'd look at into that and see how we can provide a better level of service, if that's the direction. Yes.
Is there any further new business? Councillor Bodley?
Thank you through your chair, Henry. I'm going to take this opportunity to be selfish for a second and wish my 11-year-old son a happy birthday today. And I just wanted to say to him, thank you for giving me the out to be able to eat a bubblegum flavored ice cream cake full of gummy bears and other associated horrible things that no adult would want to eat except for me. So thank you.
The theme of physician recruitment from earlier, have you shared this information with your GP, and is that going to cause us some other issues? Okay, seeing no further new business, I need enactment of bylaws. Moved by Councillor Hanmer, seconded by Councillor Freeman. All those in favour? That's carried. And then I need a motion to adjourn. That would be Councillor Freeman and Councillor Bodley. All those in favour? We stand adjourned. See you next week.